Hey everybody, this video is about meiosis, not mitosis, but meiosis. And so we're going to talk about what meiosis is, but before we do that, it's important that we refresh our memories on DNA and chromosomes and genes before we do that, okay? So real quick, I want to talk about that because it's important to understand that before you talk about meiosis. Okay, so remember, this is a cell. Inside the cell is a nucleus, and inside the nucleus is DNA. Now, if we were to zoom in on this DNA and we were to pull it out of the nucleus, we would actually see that it is a very big, double-stranded, double helix, okay? And as we have talked about in the past, though, it's not actually one long string. Remember, your DNA, people think that it's one long strand of DNA, but it's actually not. It's actually broken up into 46 smaller chunks that we call chromosomes. Okay? So, this is a chromosome. This is a chromosome, this is a chromosome, this is a chromosome, and this is a chromosome. So each of these are different, these chunks of the DNA are chromosomes, and each chromosome is actually broken up into even smaller chunks that we call genes. So if I take this and maybe this chromosome has one gene there, between here and here is gene number 1, between here and here is gene number 2, and between here and the end, this last little chunk is gene number 3. Same thing here, maybe this one just has 1 and 2, maybe this one is just 1, maybe this one has 1, 2, 3, 4 genes, maybe this one has 2. Okay, so my point is that DNA is made up of smaller chunks called chromosomes, and the chromosomes are made up of smaller sections that we call genes. Now, genes control your traits, and as we learned in previous videos about, or in other videos if you haven't seen them yet, but there's other videos about dihybrid crosses, monohybrid crosses, and how parents have different alleles for each trait. An allele is a variation of a trait, so a trait may be like hair color, maybe one of these genes, maybe this gene right here, maybe it controls hair color. But there could be different variations of hair color located in this gene, and those variations are called alleles, okay? And depending on which alleles you get from your mom and dad, or if we're just speaking plainly, depending on which genes you get from mom and which genes you get from dad and how those genes come together to make you will determine what you look like, which is why you look like a blend of your mom and your dad, okay? Now that's just a quick recap of what that is. Now we can talk about meiosis, okay? So meiosis is a process that your body uses to create cells that have half the number of chromosomes that they normally do. Now in the past we've talked about mitosis over here. So this over here is mitosis. And in mitosis you have a cell with a full set of chromosomes, and it just makes a copy of itself. That's all it's doing. It's like if I made a copy of myself and now boom, I have 2 of me standing side by side here. It's an exact copy of me. That's mitosis, when one cell makes an exact copy of itself. You may be wondering what this 2N means and this 1N down here means, and we're going to get to that in just a second, okay? So don't let that confuse you, but just know that 2N means a full set of chromosomes, and it makes a copy of itself to where you end up, you start with one full set, and you end up with 2 cells that each have full sets as well, okay? Unlike what we're talking about today, which is meiosis, okay? So meiosis is when you start off with one cell that has a full set of chromosomes, and you end with 4 cells, 1, 2, 3, 4, that have a half set of chromosome. Okay, so that's where this 2N and 1N come in. Okay, so 2N, that N, the letter N, just is a replacement or an abbreviation for a set of chromosomes. So your cells actually have 2 complete sets of chromosomes. Okay, there are 46 chromosomes inside of a regular cell. And in mitosis, you start with 46. Let me right over here. You start with 46, and you end with 2 that each have 46. In meiosis, however, you start with 46 chromosomes, and you end up with 4 cells that have 23 apiece. Okay, so they all have 23 apiece. So how did we go from 1 with 46 to 4 with 23? Shouldn't it just be 2 with 23? If you take 46 and you divide it by 2, that's 23 each, right? Well, you actually, part of meiosis is before the cell goes through meiosis, it actually doubles the amount of DNA inside of it. And then you split that in half, and then in half again, okay? So we're not going to get into that right now, but my point is that you start with 46 and you end with 23. You end with a half set of chromosomes, half the amount of chromosomes that a normal cell would typically have. Now, why is that important? Well, the reason that's important is because if you did not do that, let's say in people, for instance, like our cells, like I said, we have 46 chromosomes. If your cells did not do meiosis, then there are these, let me tell you this first, there are these cells in your body that are called, well, they're called sex cells, okay? Now, these sex cells are located in the male testes and the female ovaries. And these cells, they create what are called gametes, okay? And gametes are going to be sperm and eggs, okay? So these sex cells have 46, but then when they do meiosis, they make sperm that have 23 and an egg that has 23. And the reason that's important is because, of course, as we know, the sperm and the egg are going to join together, and 23 plus 23, the 23 chromosomes in the sperm plus the 23 chromosomes in the egg are going to come together to make the very first cell that will eventually become you, the baby, with 46 chromosomes, which is the appropriate number of chromosomes. So the reason why meiosis is very important in organisms that reproduce sexually, meaning a mom and a dad are involved, is because if you didn't, then the sperm would have 46, and the egg would have 46, and you would have 92 chromosomes in the baby, which is twice as much as you need. And you might think, oh wow, more DNA, even better, but it's actually not. Just having one extra chromosome can be very detrimental. Imagine 46 more chromosomes, how bad that could be, okay? So it's important to do meiosis to cut the number of chromosomes in the sperm and the eggs in half down to 23 and 23, so that when they join back together to make the first cell that will become you, that first cell has 46 chromosomes. And then that cell will go through mitosis. Mitosis, not meiosis, but mitosis, to end up with 46 chromosomes in each one, and those 2 will go through mitosis again to make 4 cells with 46 chromosomes, and those 4 will go through mitosis again to make 8, and again to make 16, so on and so forth. And by the way, this very first cell that will ever become you is called a zygote. This is the zygote, okay? That's an important one that you're going to have to remember at some point, is the zygote. Just know that the zygote is the very first cell that gets made after the sperm and the egg combine, and that's what eventually becomes you, okay? It's what you were when you were 1 cell big. Okay, so now, another very important part of meiosis is not just the fact that we're cutting down the number of chromosomes from 46 down to 23 so that we have the right number of chromosomes when they recombine to make you, but there's also this other very important thing that happens. This is just another picture. Let me go to the next one. I'll come back to this one. There's also another very important thing that happens during meiosis, okay? And the thing that I'm talking about is this thing called crossing over. You have to get used to the bells. I am in an actual school, after all. Crossing over. So what is crossing over? Well, crossing over is this thing that happens with the chromosomes while we're going through meiosis, while we're making sperm and egg cells, okay? So what it is you have 2 chromosomes here, and these are what we call homologous chromosomes. So you remember how I told you we actually have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and there's 2 in each pair, and there's 23 pair, okay? Imagine it like shoes. If you have 23 pairs of shoes, you have 46 total shoes, just like you have 46 total chromosomes. But they're not all different. Actually, half of them are just a copy of the other half, okay, just like in shoes. So 2 shoes are just alike in this pair, and you have 23 pairs, but the 2 in that pair are just alike. They're mirror images of each other. So let's look at that 1 pair of shoes, okay? So these are 2 chromosomes that are just like each other, 2 of your 46 chromosomes that are just like each other, and they are a pair. And this pair we call homologous chromosomes. Homologous, okay? So in this pair of shoes, or in this pair of chromosomes, actually one of these chromosomes is from mom, and the other chromosome is from dad, okay? So when you're going through meiosis, and these sex cells are producing your gametes, which are sperm and egg, before they actually do that, real quick, they shuffle their DNA together. So this chromosome from mom and this chromosome from dad will do this thing where they actually cross over, and the end result is where you can see you have a little bit of dad's chromosome on mom, on what was mom's chromosome, and you have a little bit of mom's, the chromosome you got from your mom, on the chromosome you got from your dad. Okay, so it's kind of like if you have 2 decks of cards, one from your mom, one from your dad, you kind of shuffle the cards together and you swap them out. But you end up with the cards you should have. Like the jack of spades on this deck from your dad and the jack of spades from the deck on your mom, they will swap. Okay, so so you end up with the cards you should have, or in other words, you end up with the genes that you should have, and the right number of those genes. They're just mixed and matched. Some of these in this deck were in the other deck before, and now vice versa, okay? So that's what's happening here. We just took a little bit of DNA from this chromosome that you got from dad, swapped it out with a little bit of this chromosome that you got from mom. And the reason that's important, you're probably saying, okay, well, why? That's cool and all, but like, what's the point? Why is that important? Well, the reason that's important is because it leads to increased variation. Okay. Now, variation is very important. Genetic variation is very important. The reason it's important is because the more variation that you have in your DNA, the better of a chance that the species has for survival. So variation doesn't necessarily make a big difference to you, the individual, but it's the old putting all your eggs in one basket argument. If you've never heard that expression before, if you put all your eggs in one basket, if you drop that one basket, all your eggs are gone. So by doing this, what your DNA is doing is it is mixing and becoming more varied, and so that way we have in the human population as a species, for all of us, all of our DNA is very different from how it would have been had we not done this. Okay, so it just adds to the variation, and when you do that, it decreases that chance of like one disease. If we were all the same genetically, a disease could come through, and if we were all susceptible to it because all of our genes were the same, because our DNA was the same, well then we would all get wiped out, meaning all of our eggs would be in one basket. That basket falls, all of our eggs are gone, okay? But by doing this, we're putting some eggs in this basket, some eggs in this basket. And so that way, if one of the baskets falls, we didn't lose all of our eggs. We may lose some people, but we're not going to lose the entire species. So that's why variation is very important. Okay. All right, so as an example, let's say that these are, this is a question that's from an actual assignment, and I want to go over this one specifically. I want to give this one some special attention, just because I feel like it really illustrates the point. So this question says the diagram shows a diploid cell. Remember, diploid means 2N, or a full set of DNA, with 2 homologous pairs of chromosomes. So here's a homologous pair, and here's a homologous pair here, these two here, okay? It says, due to independent assortment, the possible allele combinations that could be found in gametes produced by meiosis are, so what we're saying is if this cell, if this DNA here were to go through meiosis, well, what could be the end result? Well, what could happen is, remember, in meiosis, these homologous pairs, one of these two is going to go into the sperm cell or the egg cell. Okay, so let's just say that these are the male sex cells and we are making sperm. So we're going to make one sperm over here, and we're going to make another sperm over here. Okay, and there's millions of sperm that get made, but let's just look at these two. Okay, so we could have this chromosome with this big B allele go over here to this sperm, and the small b go over to this sperm, and we could have this little d go over to this sperm, and the big D go over to this sperm. And now this sperm has the big B little d genotype, and this one has the little b big D genotype. So if this sperm were to fertilize the egg, then the baby would have a different genotype. It would have different alleles and genes than if this sperm were to go and fertilize the egg, okay? And this process is completely random. So which one goes where is completely random, which just adds to the variation which once again is good for the species as a whole. So the question is, what are all the different possibilities? Well, we could get a big B here and a little d here, or maybe the little b could come over here and the little d could come over here, or maybe the little b could come over here and the big D can go over there, or maybe the big B could go over here to the sperm and the big D could go over here. So we could have little b big D, big B little d, little b little d, big B big D. We could have 4 different combinations of genotypes in any given sperm, and once again it's all random. Now you're not going to have 2 B's or 2 D's, okay? That's not how that works. One of each goes to each sperm, okay? So once again, just to recap what we talked about, sexual reproduction needs meiosis in order to cut down on the number of chromosomes in the cell from 46 to 23, so that when the 23 in the sperm and the 23 in the egg come together, they'll make 46, which is normal, in that first cell that becomes you, called the zygote. And then the zygote will go through mitosis to make every cell that is now making up you. They do crossing over. While in the process of meiosis, the chromosomes do crossing over to increase variation, which is good, because then that makes the species as a whole less susceptible to a single tragedy like a disease or something that could wipe out the whole species. So that is it. If you have any questions, please let me know, but that is meiosis for now. Sorry this video was so long, and we'll see you next time.